Hey guys, tonight we tumble back in time to one of the strangest, most surreal court cases ever whispered through the cobbled alleyways of history. You're standing in a dim, wood-paneled courtroom, and the scent in the air is a potent mix of damp stone, stale rushes, and something porky. Torches hiss. A dozen sleepy villagers crowd the benches in hushed curiosity. And you? You're not the only one on trial. No, beside you is a pig, thick-bodied, iron-cuffed, and very much accused of murder. You probably won't survive this trial, to be honest. But neither will the pig. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're barefoot on cold stone, ushered by two guards whose job descriptions clearly never included escort livestock to court. As you trudge along, you try not to trip over your rough-spun tunic, and the pig, short, sturdy, utterly unfazed, snorts along beside you. A few muttered prayers and a man with an oversized scroll wait at the far end. You don't speak much Latin, but you catch enough to realize they're calling this a capital case. Punishable by death. Yes, for both of you. The year is 1386. You're in Falaise, a town in northern France with more castles than common sense. You keep sneaking glances at the accused, who is currently chewing a corner of your shared bench. This pig, apparently, killed a child. Mauled it, they say. Unprovoked. But that's not even the oddest part. The oddest part is that everyone here seems to take it seriously. There's a real judge, parchment scribes, even a legal advocate for the pig. You squint toward him now. He's adjusting his robes and whispering in the swine's twitching ear like it might respond. And you? You're struggling to remember if this is a dream, or a joke, or maybe some very niche religious ritual you missed in catechism. But no, this is deadly real. Because in medieval Europe, animals could be tried for crimes. And they often were. See, back in the day, people didn't separate the natural and moral worlds the way we do now. A pig that killed a baby wasn't just an animal behaving badly, it was a moral offender. A creature capable of sin. That meant it deserved a trial, like anyone else. It might sound bizarre now, but this legal quirk stretched across the continent for centuries. Historians still argue whether these trials were meant to comfort the public, enforce divine justice, or simply scare the neighbors into keeping their livestock on a leash. And here in Falaise, the system is on full display. The crowd murmurs as the scribe begins reading the charges. He uses more dramatic flair than you'd expect for a pig trial. Phrases like "with malice aforethought" and "cruel intent" echo off the walls, as if the accused had plotted this like some four-legged assassin. You glance at the pig, who has now fallen asleep. A woman in the crowd begins weeping softly. The victim's mother, maybe. You feel the air thicken with a strange, shared grief, and something else. Anticipation? You realize the people of Falaise need this trial. Not just for closure, for control. In a time when diseases, storms, and accidents killed indiscriminately, maybe holding someone, or something, accountable offered a bit of sanity. Even if that someone was a sow. The judge, a balding man with a nose like a battle axe, taps his hammer. He's famous around these parts. Rumor says he once sentenced a snake to death for leading Eve astray. You can't tell if he believes the pig is guilty or if he just enjoys the performance. Either way, he commands the room like a man who knows he's presiding over more than just swine justice. He's maintaining cosmic order. Or at least, pretending to. Suddenly, a man stands and points. "That's the one," he cries. "I saw it." With its jaws still red. The pig, predictably, does not respond. As torches flicker and the walls seem to lean in, you start to wonder what your role in all this really is. Are you a witness? A bystander? A co-defendant, depending on how you answer the judge's next question? But more urgently, you wonder what happens if the pig is found guilty. Because, let's be honest, you've got the same look of guilt it does. And if they're trying animals now, who's to say where the rope stops? You shift slightly on the narrow bench, trying not to draw attention to your discomfort, or to your growing sense of disbelief. You glance at the pig again. Its eyes are half-lidded, its thick belly rising and falling in a rhythm that suggests it either doesn't understand the gravity of the situation, or it simply doesn't care. The courtroom, though, is charged with a seriousness that makes your stomach churn. The thing is, This isn't a one-off situation. Animals on trial? That's practically a genre in medieval Europe. And not just pigs. Dogs, cows, goats, even insects. If it could be blamed, it could be tried. You're caught in a world where people sincerely believe a non-human creature can form intent, make choices, and bear the consequences. That's how the logic went, anyway. The prevailing belief during this time is that animals, while lower than humans on the grand ladder of God's creation, are still part of the divine order. They're not plants. They act. They react. They choose. And if they choose to sin, well, then they can be judged. You look around at the stone-faced villagers. They aren't mocking the process. They believe in it. The law books agree. Ecclesiastical law, the kind born from church councils and sacred texts, had long held that beasts could be punished for their crimes. What crime, exactly? In this case, infanticide. A terrible, gut-wrenching act. The kind of tragedy that leaves a mark on a whole village. And the pig, the accused, had been found on the scene. Bloodied. Still warm. Still snorting. You can almost feel the collective grief being redirected toward this convenient symbol. The townsfolk meet a target. A villain. Someone, or something, they can look at and say, there. That's what went wrong. And the pig? She fits the bill, even if her only real crime might have been being hungry at the wrong time in the wrong place. What's wild is, this isn't even legally unusual. Animal trials happen across Europe for centuries. France, Switzerland, Germany, Italy, they all had cases on the books. In 1474, a rooster in Basel was charged with laying an unnatural egg and burned at the stake. In 1314, a bunch of rats were summoned to court in Autun, France, for destroying barley crops. Their lawyer argued they couldn't possibly show up to court because cats were a public menace on the road. That actually worked. Historians still argue whether the people genuinely believed these animals were culpable or whether it was more about controlling the narrative, sending a message to the public, reinforcing divine justice, or simply giving a devastated community something to do with their pain. Back in Falaise, you're reminded that pigs were especially common defendants. They roamed freely, lived close to humans, and weren't always shy about snatching scraps, or more. In poor towns, pigs might be allowed to scavenge in the streets, including near waste heaps and unattended children. Accidents happened. And when they did, someone had to be punished. The philosophy behind this was a mix of Roman legal tradition and Christian theology. Animals were seen as part of the moral order. Their behavior could reflect sin. A pig that kills is, in some minds, influenced by the devil, or simply responding to the original sin that tainted all creation. You glance at the clergy in the back of the room, watching silently. Later, they'll weigh in. Not about the evidence, but the soul of the beast. Because that's how deep this goes. Your own mind starts to wander as the clerk drones through more legalese. You can't help thinking of how the pig was dragged here through the village square. Children tossed stones. A man spat. Someone called it Hell's Sow. It didn't flinch. Just trudged forward, as if accepting its role in this absurd pantomime. You wonder if it remembers the child. If it feels shame. Or hunger. Or nothing at all. A guard shifts near the door. Outside, the sky is pale gray, the kind of color that turns everything to parchment. You remember hearing about another case nearby, maybe a decade earlier, where a donkey was given a formal pardon after it was found not guilty of indecent behavior. The witnesses said the donkey was clearly the victim. The church agreed. The donkey got to live. So maybe there's hope for the pig. Maybe the lawyer will say something brilliant. Or the judge will have a soft spot. But deep down, you sense how this is going to go. The people don't want a verdict. They want a sacrifice. And even though this whole thing feels like some strange fever dream, your heart breaks just a little. Not just for the pig, but for the world you've woken up in, a world where humans are so desperate to make sense of pain, they'll dress it up in robes and force it to plead its case. The pig stirs. Looks around. The court goes quiet as the scribe reads the final line of the indictment, murder by mauling, with intent to kill, an unrepentant spirit. The words are heavy. Unrepentant. As if she's been asked to apologize. You catch the eye of a woman in the front row. She's gripping her son's hand like it's a lifeline. You wonder what she sees when she looks at the pig. Maybe the face of chaos. Maybe the beast that robbed her neighbor of joy. Or maybe, just maybe, she sees a mirror. A reflection of a world that can't always be explained. You lean back and exhale. This trial's just getting started. The air outside the courtroom is thick with chimney smoke and whispered judgment. You step into the cobbled streets of Falaise, trailing behind a few of the court attendees. They huddle in small knots, murmuring the pig's name like its curse. You can't help but marvel at how easily the whole town has folded this bizarre trial into its rhythm, like a new market day or another bout of bad weather. Falaise isn't exactly a bustling metropolis. It's a sleepy, stone-clad Norman town tucked into the green folds of northern France. In 1386, it's defined by its castle, an imposing fortress of grey walls and looming turrets where William the Conqueror was born. That's right, the William. The guy who later stomped over to England and rewrote its history like a student fixing a term paper at the last second. You glance at the distant ramparts and think, this place has seen a lot of wild things. But a pig on trial for murder? That's probably top 10. You pass narrow alleys, sagging timber-framed houses, and the occasional barefoot child. The smell of bread competes with that of tanneries. There's a weight to this town, the kind born from centuries of superstition, survival, and watching people die of things you can't explain. You remember hearing that just a few years back, half the village succumbed to the plague. The Black Death had swept through like a vengeful wind, and people had started blaming everything from bad air to unholy pigs. There's an old superstition here that animals who eat human flesh take on some part of the soul, like chewing on a ghost. That kind of belief doesn't fade quickly. If anything, it settles in, growing barnacle-thick on the minds of everyone from chimney sweeps to clergy. You notice how everyone's eyes slide toward the pig pen as they walk by. It's been placed behind the local tithing barn, in full view of the square, as if the sow were already a monument. Some kids have tossed a wreath of wilted herbs over its gate. A macabre gesture, or maybe just childish curiosity. The pig, oblivious to her rising infamy, roots in the straw. You pause nearby and watch as a friar blesses himself before walking on. She's not the only one who's been kept close to town. You're under unofficial observation too, which is a polite way of saying, they're not sure if you're next. The mayor's steward even visited your home this morning. Not to accuse you directly, but to ask clarifying questions. Where were you when it happened? Had you noticed the pig acting unusually? Did the child provoke it? Did you feed the pig before the event? You're aware of what they're really trying to find out, whether you had a hand in what happened, or whether the pig somehow absorbed your wickedness. It's unsettling, this weight of blame, like a fog that keeps finding your skin. You try to shake it off as you walk back through the square, which is already being measured and marked. For what? You're not sure. But something tells you the townspeople aren't preparing for a festival. They're preparing for an execution. There's a blacksmith hammering at a peculiar set of chains, once far too thick for a human neck. And in the bakery, a boy asks if pigs cry when they know they're doomed. His mother hushes him fast, like it's a curse to even wonder. You watch this all unfold with the slow-motion clarity of a fevered dream. What strikes you most is the quiet coordination. Everyone seems to know what role to play. The baker grieves. The smith prepares. The priest offers shrugs that mean God will sort it. And the pig? She just snoozes. Historians still argue whether towns like Falaise orchestrated these spectacles for symbolic justice or for catharsis. Was it grief theater? A twisted kind of therapy? Or something darker, power disguised as righteousness? There's no consensus. But one thing's clear, this wasn't rare. You hear an older man recount a story from a village not far from here, where a goat was excommunicated for walking into a chapel and eating the altar cloth. Another time, a horse was accused of heresy after mimicking the priest's chants too closely. In both cases, the animals were dealt with like troublesome peasants. Which, come to think of it, wasn't a great outcome. Neither. You return to the pig's pen just as dusk paints the stones pink. A guard is posted now. He nods at you, not unkindly, but with that look of someone who knows their job is ridiculous and doesn't want to talk about it. The pig rolls onto her side, exposing a belly scratched by straw. She seems unaware of the scrolls being written about her. Or maybe she knows and simply doesn't care. Either way, the town is holding its breath. You glance back at the castle, silhouetted against the sky. This place, this strange, backward, beating heart of medieval France, feels like it's balancing on the edge of something. Not just a trial. A reckoning. A chance to stare into the unknown and pin it on a snout with bristles. The trial continues tomorrow. And you're not sure if it's the pig or the town itself that's truly on the stand. Morning arrives like a slap of cold water. The bells from the parish church clang into the fog, and you jolt awake to the sound of feet on gravel. The trial resumes today, and it's clear from the bustle outside that the townsfolk are already gathering. You splash your face with water that smells faintly of iron and stable hay. This is not the kind of day that invites lingering. When you return to the courtroom, it feels tighter. Not physically, the stone walls haven't moved, but emotionally. There's tension in the air, thick and ready to snap. You spot several new faces, including a traveling notary from Rouen and a merchant who, you hear, once sued a goose for trespassing in his grain stores. Everyone's leaning in for the main event. The crime is finally laid out in detail. You already know the basics: child dead, pig caught at the scene, but now you hear the full story. A little boy, barely 3 years old, left alone for just a few minutes outside his family's hovel. A pig rooting through garbage. A scream. By the time the mother rushed outside, the boy was already gone. The pig was hovering nearby, her face streaked with red. That's all anyone saw. But memory is a tricky beast, especially in grief. Some say the pig was hovering. Others claim she was chewing. Some say the boy was already injured. Others insist she delivered the killing blow. The story shifts, stretches, folds in on itself like bread dough kneaded too long. And through it all, the pig stays quiet, her tail giving a lazy twitch now and then. You glance around the courtroom and notice a curious pattern. Everyone seems to need this pig to be guilty. Why? Because the alternative is unthinkable. If the pig didn't do it, if it was an accident, or the boy fell, or someone else was involved, then that means the world is even less fair than they feared. It means death can come without justice, without explanation. It means chaos, and no one wants chaos. So better a guilty pig than an innocent accident. You begin to notice something else, too. The way people talk about the crime has shifted. They no longer say the pig may have. They say the murder. As if it's been confirmed. The language itself has betrayed the process. The town's baker takes the stand. His apron is stained with flour, and he looks nervous. He says he saw the pig a few days earlier near the well, chasing hens. She had a temper, he adds, as if pigs normally apply for anger management. Next up is the mother of the child. Her voice is hollow, her eyes sunken with grief that's gone beyond the point of crying. She doesn't even look at the pig. Just describes the moment she saw her son's body, and how she heard grunting and squealing. It's haunting. And honest. But it's not evidence. Still, the courtroom eats it up like sacrament. Then comes the town bailiff. He's the one who chained the pig. He describes the scene like a warrior recounting a battle. The pig didn't resist. She went calmly, as if knowing her guilt, he says. You want to object. You want to ask what kind of animal doesn't go calmly when it's dragged away. But no one else seems to see the problem. And this, you realize, is the real engine of the trial, not facts, but feelings. Grief has coiled around the town like ivy around a crumbling wall, and this pig is the easiest thing to blame. Historians still argue whether these trials served more as legal precedent or communal performance. Was it a real courtroom, or just theater with costumes and stakes? Some argue it was both. A tragic opera where everyone knew the ending, but clapped anyway. You hear a whisper behind you. They've already measured the rope. Back in the holding pen, the pig is being watched by a friar now. He's scribbling notes, possibly about whether animals can sin, or whether sin can manifest in them. This is a major theological debate in the 14th century. Some believe animals are innocent and capable of moral choice. Others say they share in humanity's fall from grace. After all, didn't the serpent talk even to eating that fruit? The friar approaches the pig and murmurs a Latin prayer. She grunts in reply. That gets written down. You sigh. There's something heartbreaking about watching people try to make sense of tragedy using whatever tools they have, even when those tools are pigs, scrolls, and well-meaning theology. As the sun creeps higher, the court finally breaks for the day. You step outside into a town that's holding its breath. The square is eerily quiet now. A cart rolls past carrying wood, the kind of heavy planks often used for gallows. No one speaks to you directly, but the stares linger. You wonder, not for the first time, what justice actually means in a place like this. Is it about truth? Or about stability? Is it meant to comfort the living? Or punish the dead? The pig is back in her pen by dusk, snoring. You sit nearby, tossing pebbles into the dirt, listening to the town go on pretending everything is normal. The baker's selling loaves. The priest rings the evening bell, and someone is stitching a banner for the execution. No one calls it that. They say the reckoning, or the cleansing. It's all a ritual, really. And tomorrow, the ritual continues. By the time the sun clears the rooftops the next morning, the courtroom is already packed. People are standing shoulder to shoulder, breath turning to fog in the cold air, eyes wide with anticipation. You squeeze through the crowd and reclaim your creaky bench beside the pig, who smells like hay, old bread, and something faintly sour. A clerk fans his armpits with a folded parchment. It's going to be a long day. Today, it's all about witnesses. The judge is eager, hunched over like a buzzard with gout, eager to pick the bones of the story until he finds something juicy. His clerk announces the first name, and a portly man in a fishy-smelling tunic stands. He clears his throat dramatically, then launches into his tale. "I saw the pig," he says, "the very day before the incident. She looked off. You blink. That's the testimony? She had a wild look," he continues, "like she'd tasted blood before." He pauses, apparently satisfied he's dropped a cinematic line. The courtroom murmurs. The judge nods slowly, as though this is crucial evidence and not just someone describing a pig doing a very pig-like thing. Then comes the midwife. She claims she'd seen the pig eyeing children on previous occasions. "There's a hunger in animals that have turned," she says. "Something evil in their gaze." You glance sideways at the accused, now chewing her own tail. If she's evil, she's doing a terrible job at appearing diabolical. Still, the midwife's testimony lands like a brick. Someone gasps. The judge scribbles something vigorously. Next is a boy no older than 8. He's pushed forward by his mother and stands trembling in his patched tunic. "I saw her with a chicken once," he whispers. "She bit it." That's it. That's his whole statement. Another woman claims she heard the pig grunting like a demon on the morning of the child's death. Another swears she saw hoofprints around the cradle. Another insists the pig was unusually clean that day, like she'd washed the blood off herself. You begin to realize the courtroom has entered a new phase, full fantasy mode. Historians still argue whether medieval communities sincerely believed in supernatural traits among criminal animals or whether it was a kind of mass delusion, trauma in costume. Here in Falaise, it seems like everyone is doing their part in an unspoken pageant. Even those who weren't there during the incident have suddenly remembered ominous signs. A cracked egg. A pig-shaped cloud. A dead mouse in a milk pail. The judge encourages them all. He gestures to the scribe to keep recording. "All testimony matters," he declares, stroking his beard like he's solving the murder of the century and not, let's remember, a toddler being possibly bumped by a roaming animal. There's even a whisper of sorcery now. One man, a bearded cobbler who clearly fancies himself a philosopher, raises the idea that perhaps the pig had been used by someone. "Pigs don't choose murder," he says. "People choose it for them." The courtroom hushes. That's actually kind of deep. It triggers a wave of side eyes and murmurs. If the pig didn't act alone, then someone in this very room might be the puppet master. But just as quickly, the suggestion is brushed away by the judge, who mutters, "We're not here for riddles." You wonder if he means that literally or metaphorically. By mid-afternoon, the scribe's fingers are ink-stained and cramped, and the judge calls for a brief recess. You step out into the crisp air and wander toward the pig's pen again. She's there, of course, in her familiar patch of dirt, blissfully unaware she's just been compared to a demon, a sorcerer's pawn, and a cloud. What's funny is, no one seems to mention the obvious, that pigs, though incredibly intelligent, don't think like people. They don't weigh moral consequences or consider the long-term impact of biting someone. They act. They react. Sometimes they panic. Sometimes they're hungry. That's it. But try telling that to a crowd that's halfway through sewing an execution banner. You lean against a fence post and listen to the buzz of town gossip swirling in the air. One man is arguing that the pig had a glint in her eye. Another says it's not the pig, but the entire breed. "Too clever by half," he says, shaking his head. "Can't trust him." You watch the conversation slide from one pig to all pigs in under a minute. Ah yes, medieval profiling. Back inside the courtroom, the judge returns from his private meal. You sincerely hope it wasn't pork, and declares he'll allow one more witness. A shepherd steps forward. He's nervous, wringing his cap in his hands. His beard twitches with nerves. I've seen animals tried before," he begins. "Up north. They hanged a cow once. stomped a man's ribs in. But this, he swallows. This pig? She don't seem angry. She seems scared. There's a pause. A full, breath-holding, thought-freezing pause. The judge doesn't like that. You can almost hear the courtroom leaning back, like a crowd deciding the joke didn't land. The shepherd steps down quickly, eyes to the floor. The court closes for the day. You walk home under a pink sky and feel like you've just watched a very strange play where everyone pretended not to be acting. The villagers, the judge, the pig, even yourself. The town is clinging to the story like a raft, and heaven help anyone who tries to poke holes in it. That night, you can't sleep. Not because of guilt or fear or even curiosity, but because somewhere in the distance, the pig is snoring. Loudly. Contentedly. As if she knows this town, with its chants and scrolls and robed men, is just spinning its wheels. And maybe, just maybe, she's waiting for the whole thing to collapse under its own absurdity. The next day begins not with a sunrise but with a summons. The town crier, yes, that guy with the booming voice and an apparent love of bell ringing, walks through the streets announcing the unusual. The pig shall be represented today. Come witness fair justice for beast and man. You rub your eyes. Represented? Sure enough, when you arrive at the courthouse, there's a man already standing near the defendant's side, dressed in black robes, parchment in hand. The pig's attorney has arrived, and he looks alarmingly sincere. Now, in modern times, the idea of assigning a defense lawyer to a farm animal might be grounds for a comedy sketch. But in medieval Europe, it's business as usual, at least when the accused is valuable property. And this pig, as you've learned, belongs to a local abbey, an institution wealthy enough to be both religious and extremely petty about legal liabilities. So here he is, the pig's court-appointed advocate, prepared to argue her innocence like she were a merchant or a noble or a really unfortunate apprentice. His name is John Le Cotterell, and he takes his job with the kind of gravity typically reserved for bridge collapses and noble divorces. You can tell from the way he straightens his shoulders and clears his throat that he plans to make a show of it. The courtroom leans forward in collective fascination. Even the pig sits up slightly, as if intrigued by this unexpected plot twist. John begins by citing Roman law. Not because anyone here is well versed in Roman precedent, but because it sounds impressive. He argues that responsibility must rest with the owner, not the beast. The sow acted from instinct, he says, not malice. He points out that she was allowed to roam freely, no tether, no pen. Is it not negligence, he asks, to allow a beast such liberty among children? The judge scowls. John presses on, now citing church law. Animals, he intones, though part of creation, cannot distinguish right from wrong. Therefore, they cannot sin. They may err, they may wound, but they do not intend. The crowd fidgets. Some are clearly uncomfortable with this argument, which seems dangerously close to excusing the pig. The child is still dead, after all. And grief, as you've seen, doesn't like to be told it might be mistaken. But John isn't done. He calls no witnesses, offers no sob stories. Instead, he paces slowly and lays out a line of logic so tidy it's almost hypnotic. If the pig acted without moral agency, she is not guilty. And if she was provoked, or if the child was unsupervised, then the responsibility lies elsewhere. You glance around and notice the subtle shift. Some faces have furrowed brows now. Not confusion, doubt. Real, wriggling doubt. The kind that makes people uncomfortable in their own skin. Historians still argue about the roles these animal advocates played. Were they true believers in justice, or simply hired hands protecting property interests? It's likely a little of both. The abbey that owns the pig might not care about her soul, but they definitely care about losing face, or livestock. John concludes with a final, unexpected twist. He asks the court for clemency. Not acquittal, he knows better, but a lesser sentence. Let her be exiled, not executed, he pleads. Let her live in a pen, far from children, but alive. To destroy her is to destroy without teaching. To exile her is to mark the error without vengeance. It's elegant, noble, almost moving. The judge stares at him for a long time, then mutters something that sounds suspiciously like hogwash. Still, the moment lands. It plants a seed. As court adjourns, you follow the crowd out into the square. The conversation is buzzing, more complex than before. A woman tells her friend she doesn't trust lawyers, even pig ones. A local priest mutters that mercy is for men, not beasts. But a merchant, stroking his beard, says, maybe the man's got a point. You pass by a stall selling candles shaped like animals, goats, cows, even pigs. Someone has added a tiny scroll to one of them, tied with thread. You don't ask what it says. You already know. Later that evening, you find yourself wandering near the abbey. The monks are quiet, their windows glowing faintly. You catch part of a prayer floating through the air. It's not for the pig. It's for the family of the child. But it's said with that same careful, reverent tone you've heard at funerals. The abbey's livestock pen is empty tonight. The rest of the pigs have been moved. Too risky, too emotional. Only one remains in town. The one on trial. Back at the pen behind the courthouse, the sow paces slowly in her straw. She pauses, lifts her head to the sky as if sensing something you can't. Maybe she's just hungry. Maybe she's annoyed. Or maybe, just maybe, she's thinking about her defense attorney's performance and wondering why no one brought snacks. You sit nearby, cross-legged in the dirt, and consider the strangeness of it all. A lawyer for a pig. A town wrestling with grief. A courtroom trying to find truth in grunts and bite marks. You'd laugh, if it weren't all so heavy. The trial resumes tomorrow. And now, the court must decide, is this pig a monster? Or just a scapegoat in a world desperate for meaning? The courtroom has a particular kind of silence this morning, the dense, suspicious kind that feels like it's pressing its ear to the walls. You notice it as soon as you step inside. The benches are full, but no one's whispering. Even the creaky doors dare not groan. Something is different today. Then you see him. The judge has arrived early and is already seated, glaring over the rim of his goblet like someone plotting either a verdict or a very dramatic exit. He's not wearing his usual robes either. Today, his attire is darker, stiffer, trimmed in something that looks suspiciously like fox fur. He's making a statement, though what that statement is, exactly, remains unclear. The clerk clears his throat and announces that today's proceedings shall be short, but serious. That's never a good sign. The judge stands. His face looks chiseled from granite and about as expressive. But there's something in his eyes today, something sharper than usual. You lean forward as he begins. We have heard testimony, he says. We have seen evidence. We have allowed argument. But today, we must examine the weightiest matter of all. He pauses. The room holds its collective breath. The morality of the accused. You feel your shoulders tighten. This is the part where things go from questionable to deeply surreal. The judge motions for the friar to approach. He's the same man who had been watching over the pig, taking notes like a monk deciphering holy relics. He carries a scroll in a small wooden box. As he opens the scroll, you catch the title, De Anima Porcina, on the soul of the pig. You're not kidding. The friar begins a speech that sounds more sermon than testimony. He speaks of creation, of God's order, of beasts being beneath man, but not void of consequence. While a pig cannot speak, he says, it can act. And its actions reflect the world's broken nature. He goes on to reference St. Augustine, who wrote extensively on the corruption of flesh, though never, to your knowledge, on actual pork flesh. The friar insists that since the pig acted violently, and violence is sin, the pig has therefore sinned. A soul may be darkened by instinct, he says. And that darkness may invite justice. Historians still debate whether clergy in cases like these believed animals had souls. Some said no, animals were soulless automatons. Others argued that certain animals, particularly those close to humans, existed in a sort of moral limbo. They might not be judged in the afterlife, but they could reflect sin in the present. Sort of like living warnings with snouts. The friar finishes by opening the wooden box. Inside is a small cross. He holds it toward the pig. She snorts. The courtroom gasps. She rejects the symbol of the Lord. Someone cries. You roll your eyes so hard you nearly sprain something. The pig, for her part, walks in a circle and promptly relieves herself in the straw. The friar flinches. You can feel the tide shifting again. The courtroom wants blood. The lawyer's arguments from yesterday are fading like breath on glass. Today's focus is on meaning, not guilt, not evidence, but what the act represents. The judge nods solemnly. It is not merely the flesh we judge, he says, but the disruption of order. You realize what he's doing. He's not weighing facts anymore. He's deciding what makes the town feel whole again. A guilty pig? That's a clean story. A tidy ending. It says, this world has rules, and when they're broken, someone pays. It doesn't matter that the someone is covered in bristles. The rest of the day drips by like cold molasses. The court doesn't call more witnesses. Instead, the townspeople give speeches. That's right, impromptu moral declarations about justice, grief, and the symbolism of pigs. One man compares the sow to Cain. Another calls her a walking omen. A woman sobs as she says she can't let her children near swine anymore. What if they catch the wickedness, she asks. Outside, you hear the hammering begin again. Not the blacksmith this time. The carpenter. They're building something. You sit near the pig that evening, her breath a warm rhythm in the cooling air. You want to think this is all just a product of a different time. A rough era. Superstition and ignorance mixing like bitter herbs in a stew. But deep down, you know better. People haven't changed all that much. They still need villains. They still need rituals. They still fear chaos more than they fear injustice. You close your eyes and listen to the town breathe, horses snorting, fires crackling, someone singing off-key. You hear the pig snore again, almost a purr. She doesn't know her place in the cosmos has been debated for hours. She doesn't care that she was called Cain. She's just a pig. And tomorrow, she might become something else entirely, a lesson. When you arrive at the courthouse the next morning, the air feels oddly celebratory. Someone set up a stall selling roasted chestnuts. A dog is wearing a tiny cape. Children are running about with sticks pretending to be judges and lawyers. You pause, heart sinking, as it dawns on you, this town isn't grieving anymore. It's preparing for a show. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere is electric, if a little unhinged. The judge's bench has been polished. The clerk's inkpots are neatly arranged. The pig has been washed, or at least wiped down, with a faint smell of lavender soap clinging to her hide. You swear someone tried to brush her. She looks like a contestant waiting for the talent portion of the pageant. But what unfolds next is less about drama and more about pattern. You realize that the process has taken on a strange rhythm. Everyone plays their part. The scribe writes. The judge glowers. The villagers gasp at the right moments. You half expect someone to pass around snacks. And this, right here, is where it hits you. It's not about the pig anymore. It's about the ritual. Historians still argue over how to interpret these animal trials. Were they genuine legal processes, carried out with the same solemnity as human trials? Or were they symbolic spectacles, ritualized purging of grief and fear dressed up in the language of law? Maybe both, maybe neither. The records, patchy and poetic, only tell us what was done, not why. But sitting here, you feel it in your bones. The trial of the pig has become theater. Not the comedy you might expect, but tragedy with costumes and a chorus of coughs and sniffles. Today, the town reeve takes the stand. His job is to oversee the village's assets, and apparently, that now includes moral assets. He delivers a long, winding monologue about the importance of community standards and the invisible line between man and beast. In times of sorrow, he says, we must draw the line firmly. If a beast can destroy without consequence, what's to stop the world from unraveling? His voice trembles slightly. The courtroom nods, enraptured. You don't know whether to groan or weep. Next, the judge allows something highly unusual, character testimony. For a pig, several townsfolk describe her as a loner. Another says she's always been different. One man claims she squealed strangely during a rainstorm last spring, which he took as a dark sign. You want to object on the pig's behalf, but your rationality has long since been ejected from the courtroom like an unwanted egg in a holy omelet. A miller's wife stands and says the pig once followed her for several minutes. She had eyes like a thief, she insists, as if that seals the argument. And now the laughter begins. Not mockery, nervous, shared, socially acceptable laughter. The kind people use to release tension without letting themselves feel grief. Someone chuckles about the pig with a soul, and another calls her Madame Mauler. The pig, still shackled but seemingly unfazed, lies down and sighs. You realize how far this has drifted from the child, from the family, from the tragedy that started it all. The courtroom isn't mourning anymore. It's performing. The audience has found catharsis in absurdity. But maybe, in their own strange way, they need it. This era, the late 14th century, isn't exactly a feel-good time. Europe is still reeling from the Black Death. Food is uncertain. Bandits roam the countryside. The 100 Years' War is dragging on like the world's most exhausting argument. People are tired, scared, and when fear has no direction, it latches onto whatever it can. Even pigs. And the church, which should be offering comfort, often doubles down on guilt. Sin is everywhere, they say. In your house. In your heart. In your hog pen. So when something terrible happens, like the death of a child, people search desperately for the thread they can pull to unravel the pain. And if the thread snorts and has hooves, so be it. You step outside during the recess. The square is buzzing. A boy is carving justice into a wooden plank. A woman sells pastries shaped like pigs. You blink at that one. A few older men are setting up a platform, a tall wooden scaffold. At first, you hope it's for a sermon, a speech, a better view of the proceedings. But deep down, you know better. It's for the execution. The crowd's energy has shifted. They're no longer waiting for justice. They're waiting for closure. And they think it comes with a rope. Back in the courtroom, the judge announces that deliberation will begin soon. You stare at the pig, who's nudged her snout into a corner of the straw, rooting for something invisible. Her tail curls lazily. She seems unaware that the town is about to decide her fate. Or maybe she knows, and she just doesn't care. You lean back, suddenly exhausted, and think of all the other animals tried before her: roosters, goats, flies, rats. Whole communities once held funerals for crops, excommunicated weevils, and summoned insects to court with formal notices. Some historians suggest it was all about control, about giving people power over a world that felt cruel and arbitrary. Maybe they were right. Maybe this trial is just another way for the people of Falaise to shout into the darkness, "We're still here. We still have rules. We can still name the monster." Even if the monster is four-legged and doesn't know it's being named. By the next morning, the courtroom smells faintly of onions, candle wax, and anticipation. It's as if the walls themselves are bracing for the final act, the creak of every bench charged with expectation. You take your place among the crowd again, and this time, there's less murmuring. Less debate. The town has entered a kind of ritual stillness. Everyone's waiting to feel something. It's strange, though. The more formal the trial becomes, the more theatrical it feels. What began as a tragedy is now cloaked in performance. The banners draped above the judge's chair. The red wax seals dangling from parchment. The lawyer's carefully combed beard. Even the pig, who's now adorned with a faint chalk mark on her forehead, likely from the bailiff, who says it's for identification, as if anyone's going to confuse her with another defendant. You look around the room and wonder what everyone's here for, really. Justice? Closure? Or simply something to believe in? The judge clears his throat and begins what you assume is the final sermon. In this town, he says, we do not allow chaos to pass for justice. He repeats it like a refrain, as though saying it enough times will make it universally true. Law binds us. Law defines us. And yet, ironically, this entire trial has little to do with law as you know it. It's a ritual, a pageant, a mechanism for reinforcing authority in a time when that authority is frighteningly fragile. This is not just a trial of a pig. It's a demonstration. A public theater of control. Historians often wonder whether the absurdity of these animal trials was lost on the people who conducted them. Did they genuinely believe the pig was capable of evil? Or was it simply that they needed something, anything, to show that human suffering could still follow rules? This moment answers that question with eerie clarity. The judge's voice grows louder. He speaks not just of pigs, but of duty, of keeping the peace, of reinforcing the line between the human and the animal, the moral and the instinctual. You realize, with a pit forming in your stomach, that this isn't about the pig anymore. It never was. It's about reminding everyone where they stand. And more importantly, where the line is. The townspeople listen raptly, nodding at all the right phrases. The pig, meanwhile, has curled into a neat spiral and begun to snore. One ear twitches. Then the defense attorney, John Le Carrel, stands again. He's clearly exhausted, but he tries one more time. His voice is softer now, less dramatic. "My lord," he says, "the law must account for truth, not just tradition. And the truth is, we cannot know this creature's mind. We cannot know what happened in those final moments. And if we cannot know, we cannot condemn." It's quiet for a heartbeat. Then the judge replies, "We must act not only on what we know, but on what we must protect." It lands like a stone in a shallow pond. Ripples, murmurs, and then silence. And in that silence, it all becomes clear. The trial was never about discerning truth. It was about performing it, wrapping uncertainty in the ritual of law until everyone felt safe again. You look at the pig, now awake and lazily scratching her side against the bench. You want to believe she knows she's on trial for her life, but you know better. She doesn't grasp sin, or justice, or the fragile scaffolding of civilization. She only knows hunger, comfort, and fear. And that may be the very reason she frightens them so much. Because if she's innocent, if she's truly blameless, then the world is terrifying. It means children can die without meaning. It means grief can strike without reason. It means the divine doesn't intervene, doesn't explain, doesn't restore balance. And so, the town must do it instead. They must make a story, create a villain, craft a punishment. The pig is just the vessel. One of the scribes sneezes, and the judge glares at him. The bailiff clears his throat and unfurls the parchment with a bit too much flair. Deliberations will now begin, he announces, as if this is all still undecided. As if this hasn't been written since the moment the child died. The jury, composed of landowners and tradesmen and one widow known for her herbal remedies, retires to a side chamber. You hear the murmur of voices behind the wall. You hear the scrape of wood as benches are pulled. The occasional cough. Then nothing. 15 minutes later, they return. No one looks surprised. The foreman, a bearded man with kind eyes and a limp, hands the parchment to the judge. The judge reads, then nods gravely. We, the court of fillets, he says, find the Sal guilty of the murder of the child, and sentence her to death. There it is. No gasp. No drama. Just a flat, exhausted silence. And then, a single word from the judge, so ordered. The courtroom begins to shift. People whisper again, but this time with the weight of finality. Some smile. Some look away. The pig continues scratching her ear, clearly unconcerned. You step outside and feel the world tilt slightly. The sky is gray now, smudged with clouds. You hear someone in the square setting up a drum. A priest is preparing the prayer of passage. The platform has been completed. Thick rope dangles from the beam like a question no one wants answered. You walk past it slowly, your footsteps soft against the worn stone. The trial is over, but the performance has only just begun. The execution platform rises like a wooden wound in the middle of the town square, tall enough to be seen from every crooked window and slanted rooftop. The pig will be hanged, that much is clear. Less clear is why this moment feels so strangely festive. You watch villagers arrive in waves, drawn as if by gravity. Children ride on their father's shoulders. Bread sellers push carts through the crowd. A man sets up a barrel and begins ladling out spiced cider. Someone's even brought a small lute. For a second, it feels like you've stumbled into a fair. Except, of course, for the noose. It hangs there, thick and unforgiving, swaying gently in the breeze like it's bored. At its base, 2 guards stand ready, checking and rechecking the frame. You half expect them to announce curtain times. There's something so precise, so coordinated about the entire thing. It's no longer just an execution. It's become a civic ceremony. The pig arrives in a cart, flanked by clergy and guards. She's been cleaned again. Her hooves glisten. Her bristles have been brushed, and someone tied a black ribbon to one ear. It bobs with every jostled step. She looks around, blinking slowly. No fear. No understanding. Just the steady snuffle of an animal who still hasn't figured out that this parade has only one destination. Historians often cite the execution of this pig in fillets as one of the most famous examples of medieval animal trials. It's detailed in multiple records, each one describing the event with solemnity. The ropes, the platform, the crowd. They always emphasize how human it all was, how the pig was treated not as livestock but as a person. A criminal. An enemy of the social order. You squeeze through the crowd and get a better view. The judge stands at the edge of the platform, reciting the sentence one more time. Found guilty by a jury of peers, he says. Sentenced to hang until dead. Peers. You almost laugh. Then you almost cry. The priest steps forward next, reading a short passage from Psalms. Something about righteousness and wrath. People bow their heads, murmuring the lines. You stay still. Then the pig is lifted, not cruelly, but firmly, onto the platform. She lets out a small grunt of confusion, her hooves tapping against the wood like she's testing it. The crowd holds its breath. A few children are hoisted higher. Someone whispers that pigs scream like people when they die. Someone else whispers that they don't scream at all, just go still. You wish they'd both stop talking. The noose goes over her neck. It's been specially fitted, wide enough to loop under her thick jaw. The bailiff adjusts it like a tailor tightening a collar. You don't know what's worse, that they're going to kill her or that they're being so professional about it. You glance around. People are crying. People are smiling. One woman is praying so hard her hands are shaking. Another is chewing on a roasted turnip like it's just another Tuesday. Then, at last, the judge nods. The trapdoor opens. And the pig, well, she drops. There's no scream. No struggle. Just a sudden, weighty thud and a communal gasp that sounds more like relief than horror. The pig swings gently. The crowd stares. And then, almost instantly, it begins to disperse. You watch them drift away. Some are talking quietly. Others move with purpose, as if this execution had been a chore they needed to check off before supper. Children skip. A dog barks. A man begins packing up his cider barrel. The priest recites a final blessing and tosses a handful of herbs at the body. The guards lower the rope slowly. One unties the black ribbon and pockets it. You stay behind as the platform is cleared, the body taken down, the ropes coiled like laundry line. There's no grave. The pig's remains will be carted off, burned or buried far outside the village. Too stained for meat. Too dangerous for memory. But you'll remember. You'll remember how no one ever really proved she was guilty. You'll remember how fear wrapped itself in law and called itself justice. You'll remember the silence of that final moment, when everyone leaned in, hoping to feel the world make sense. Historians still puzzle over why the people of Falaise went to such lengths. Some say it was about deterrence, a warning to keep animals, and their owners, in check. Others believe it was grief ritualized, an effort to process the unbearable by giving it form and consequence. But maybe, just maybe, it was neither. Maybe it was just a town trying to pretend it was in control. That pain could be managed. That chaos could be shackled. That death made more sense if it came with a rope and a sentence. The platform creaks one last time in the wind. Empty now. Bare. Almost innocent. And then it, too, is dismantled. You don't see the clergy for a few days after the execution, not out and about, anyway. It's as though they've retreated behind stone walls to recover, or recalibrate. But eventually, as with all things in Falaise, they return. And this time, they're louder. The church has decided it wants the last word on the matter. Not the judge, not the villagers, and certainly not the pig. You find yourself in the back row of the chapel, which smells like wet limestone and candle smoke. The pews are packed. The same people who watched the pig hang now sit solemnly beneath stained glass saints, murmuring prayers they could probably recite in their sleep. At the front, Father Edouard clears his throat. He's a tall man with the sort of face that never looks quite clean, no matter how much holy water it's seen. Today, he's speaking about souls, not just human ones, but the tangled theological question of whether animals possess them. The answer? Well, it depends. The church is famously non-committal about animal souls in the 14th century. You'd think they'd have picked a side after 1,000 years, but nope, still dancing around the issue. Some theologians say animals have sensual souls, the kind tied to instinct and appetite, but not reason. Others say animals, being part of creation, are touched by God and therefore sacred in their own way. And a few fringe thinkers, monks who probably didn't get invited to many feasts, argue that in rare cases, animals can be vessels for demonic influence. Guess which view Falaise is leaning toward? Father Edouard's voice booms through the chapel. Though beasts lack reason, they do not lack the mark of sin. Since Eden, the world has been broken. Even the animals suffer it. You glance around and catch more than one person nodding like he's just solved a particularly tricky riddle. He goes on to describe the pig as a symbol of excess, of gluttony, and ties her behavior back to original sin. Let this remind us, he intones, that even the lowest among us can be touched by evil, and that evil must be purged. You blink slowly. The pig is now evil incarnate. There's no talk of accidents. No talk of hunger. Just cosmic wrongdoing with trotters. Historians still debate how much influence the church had over these animal trials. Some say ecclesiastical courts often handled them directly, especially when the crime was against holy property. Others argue that the church tried to distance itself from such secular pageantry, but inevitably got dragged in when the mob demanded spiritual meaning. In Falaise, at least, the clergy are all in. Father Edouard wraps up by leading a prayer not just for the child, but for the cleansing of the town. A sort of exorcism light. You mouth the words with everyone else, feeling the strange weight of it settle over the chapel. Afterward, as people file up beneath the eyes of carved angels, you overhear snippets of conversation. Father Edouard says it wasn't just a pig, it was a warning. A beast like that, it couldn't have been born pure. She was a sign. That's what she was. It's amazing how quickly a pig becomes a metaphor. 1 week ago, she was just a sow who wandered too close to tragedy. Now she's a walking parable, a sermon in bacon form. You wander back through town and notice something else. The pig's former pen is gone. Not cleaned. Gone. As if erasing it will erase the memory. The straw is scattered. The ground flattened. A cartwheel sits where the trough once was. No marker, no plaque. Just dirt. The abbey, too, is quieter these days. You hear that the monks aren't taking any more pigs. A holy man in Rouen sent word, advising that animals prone to temptation should be distanced from the flock. A new rule, invented in the wake of the trial. Convenient. Even the town's children have absorbed the new doctrine. You watch a group of them play trial in the street. One child plays the pig. She's tied with twine, snorting dramatically. Another child is the judge. Do you repent? He shouts, holding a stick like a scepter. The pig child squeals. Everyone laughs. You don't. Something about it feels off, not just the mimicry, but how easily the fear has turned into folklore. As if the whole thing was just a ghost story with a neat moral: behave, or else. Stay in line, or the rope comes next. At dusk, you return to the chapel for Vespers. This time, it's quieter. No sermons. Just voices humming ancient hymns beneath candlelight. The flames flicker across the stone walls, across saints and sinners alike. You close your eyes. And for a moment, you picture her, the pig, not as a monster or a martyr, but simply as she was, confused, calm, caught in something far bigger than herself. No malice. No meaning. Just life, tangled. The sky is gray again when you return to the courthouse, a slate-colored dome hanging low over the rooftops like it's weighing down on everyone's thoughts. The execution may be over, the pig buried, or burned, no one quite says, but the town hasn't finished with its ritual yet. Today, they want a verdict. Not a legal one, they already have that. No, this is the real verdict. The public moment. The sealing of fate with ink and memory. The official stamping of a story that people can tell over bread and stew for decades to come. You sit in your usual place, though the courtroom feels oddly hollow now. Fewer people have shown up, maybe the blood spectacle drew more than the paperwork. Still, enough townsfolk are present to murmur and shuffle and stare toward the judge's bench, where he perches like a buzzard with a degree. The clerk stands to read the final judgment. You expect it to be short: guilty, hanged, case closed. But no, they've gone all in. This isn't a legal summary. It's a narrative. An official account, etched in language so ceremonial it practically creaks. The sow, being of monstrous behavior and bearing signs of unnatural malice, was found to have violently ended the life of the child Pierre Martin. She did so without provocation, with intention, and with no sign of remorse. You blink. Intention? Remorse? They're anthropomorphizing like it's a competitive sport. The judgment continues. It declares that the execution served as an act of public cleansing, a phrase that tastes worse the more you roll it around in your mouth. They even describe how the people gathered to reaffirm their order and righteousness through the removal of the corrupting beast. It's theater, again. But this time, they're writing the script after the curtain has fallen. The clerk finishes reading, seals the parchment with wax, and ties it with red twine. It will be kept in the town records forever. A footnote for future clerks, historians, or, let's be real, gossip mongers. You can almost picture it 100 years from now. Ah yes, the case of the pig who murdered a child and was judged with full ceremony. Quite the example of law and order. Never mind the lack of actual evidence. Never mind the contradictions. The story, once written, becomes the truth. Historians still debate whether these verdicts were meant for the people of the time or for the generations to come. Were they records of justice, or warnings in disguise. In either case, the language used was always carefully chosen. It wasn't just about what happened, it was about how people wanted it remembered. And Falaise has chosen, they want this pig to be remembered as a monster, so that the town doesn't have to feel like victims of fate. After the judgment is read, the judge steps down from his bench for what's supposed to be a final word. He doesn't speak in Latin this time. He doesn't even wear his ceremonial robe. Just a dark tunic and a tired expression. He talks about grief, about how the boy's family has suffered, about how the town has mourned, and how, in moments like these, the law must serve not only punishment, but peace. You want to believe him, but something in his eyes says even he isn't sure whether justice was served or merely performed. As he speaks, you glance around the room and spot the boy's mother near the back. Her face is unreadable. She isn't crying. She isn't smiling. She just looks absent, like someone who's watched the world spin and found no axis left. The judge ends his speech with a quote, "To keep peace, we must name the cause of its breaking." Then he turns, walks out, and doesn't look back. The courtroom empties slowly. You linger a little longer, staring at the seal on the judgment scroll. The wax is still warm. Outside, the square looks mostly normal again. The platform's been dismantled. The banner has vanished. Only the flattened earth and the faint smell of sawdust remain. A man nearby tosses breadcrumbs to pigeons. A woman washes her front step. Life returns, inch by inch. You wander toward the edge of town, to the field where they burned refuse. That's where they took the pig. You can still see the ashes. You crouch and press your fingers into the cold soil. It's charred and quiet. No marker. No stone. Just a few bones the size of fingers, brittle and sun-bleached. And here's the thing that sticks with you. The judgment was final, yes. But the truth? Still slippery. The pig was never given the benefit of doubt. Never considered beyond the surface of her species, her instincts, her unfortunate hunger. She was guilty by design. By default. By the need for closure. And now, with everything wrapped in red twine and rhetoric, the town can finally exhale. But you inhale. Because deep down, you're not sure this story is done. The morning is crisp, the kind of cool that curls your breath and makes the rooftops gleam with dew. It should feel like any other day in Falaise, now that the trial is over, the sentence carried out, and the scroll sealed. But it doesn't. There's something restless in the air, like the story refuses to lie still. And today, that restlessness is gathering in the square again. Because yes, the execution may be over, but the town has scheduled a public procession. A display. A ritual. A final bow. The pig's remains, such as they are, have been burned, but a replica effigy has been constructed, crudely made of straw and mud, hoisted on a cart with wheels that squeal like frightened mice. It's grotesque, almost cartoonish, and entirely unnecessary. Yet here they are, children scattering flowers in its path, townsfolk clapping slowly as it rolls past, and the town's clergy trailing behind with incense and Latin mutterings. You stand at the edge, unsure whether to laugh or shudder. Because this is more than ceremony. This is a town relieving itself of a burden it created. The procession winds through Falaise like a pageant of guilt in reverse. People bow. People cheer. The judge walks with his hands folded, face solemn, as if escorting a royal corpse. The scribe carries the scroll, held high. And in the middle of it all, this hollow, straw-stuffed pig on wheels, bouncing with every stone it crosses. You catch the eye of the defense lawyer, John Le Cotterell. He stands well apart from the others, near a bakery. His robe is unkempt, and his face unreadable. You give him a nod. He doesn't return it, but he doesn't look away either. Just watches the effigy roll past like a man watching the ghost of a client no one ever really tried to save. You trail behind the crowd toward the edge of the town square, where a bonfire crackles. This is the final act. The effigy is lifted, clumsily, by 4 apprentices in soot-streaked tunics. They place it atop the pyre as a monk chants a brief Latin prayer that doesn't quite reach the crowd. Most aren't listening. They're staring, waiting. With a flick of a torch, the figure ignites. Flames wrap around the straw limbs, curling inward like the town's collective guilt is being burned away. It doesn't scream. It doesn't thrash. It just burns, quiet, eerie, and too clean. And that's when the cheering begins. Yes, they actually cheer. Not loudly. Not like a festival. but enough to make your stomach twist. There's applause, smiles, even laughter. As if this were the part where the villain dies at the end of a play, and now the audience can relax. Historians often point to executions like this, not just of pigs, but of any condemned being, as theater designed to reinforce power. Justice as spectacle. And what better way to control a community than to remind them, publicly, who lives, who dies, and what happens when order is broken. But here's the thing, this wasn't punishment. Not really. This was performance. A communal exhale. A weird, firelit therapy session. The flames rise higher. Ash drifts into the wind. Children chase it like snow. You move through the dispersing crowd and hear snippets of conversations that sound almost rehearsed. She deserved it. That's what they said. Did you see the way she looked? Like she knew. I feel safer now. That last one hits hardest. Safer. As if the execution of a pig truly restored balance to a world still racked with plague, famine, and war. A woman offers you a roasted chestnut and says, "Glad it's all behind us, eh?" You nod politely. But it's not behind you. Because what you just watched wasn't closure. It was deflection. They burned the straw pig. But the fear? The chaos? The randomness of a child's death? Still there. Lurking beneath the ash. Later, as the bonfire smolders, you find yourself near the same friar who blessed the pig the day before the hanging. He's poking at the embers with a long stick. "Do you think it worked?" you ask. He doesn't look up. "Depends," he murmurs. Did they believe it did? And that, really, is the point. Justice in medieval towns wasn't always about right or wrong. It was about belief, about narrative, about plugging the holes in the human soul with story, ritual, fire, and rope. The crowd finally thins. The wind picks up. Ash blows through the square like confetti from a darker festival. You take one last look at the fire, now collapsed into glowing logs and blackened bones of straw. It's over. At least for them. For you, the image of that pig, snorting, confused, then swinging silently, will stick like smoke. Because deep down, you know the truth, the pig wasn't the only one judged. The whole town was on trial. And they found themselves innocent. The pig is gone. The ashes have cooled. But oddly enough, Felice seems brighter now, like a weight has lifted. The townspeople walk straighter. Smiles come easier. There's a quiet hum to the place, a rhythm that's crept back into the cobbled streets and timbered walls. You hear a child laughing in the distance. Bells chime from the abbey tower. Life, it seems, has resumed. But beneath that surface hum, something deeper buzzes, a kind of satisfaction that's hard to name. It isn't happiness. It's not peace either. It's more like equilibrium. The kind people feel when a tilted world has been forced upright, even if it took a little fantasy to get there. You wander the market square and notice it's more crowded than usual. Bakers, butchers, weavers, everyone seems to be out, doing what they've always done. But their voices are lighter now, lifted by the relief of resolution. Even the children have stopped playing pig trial. They're back to throwing pebbles and chasing chickens. That strange little game has already become an odd blip in a week filled with smoke and sermons. You overhear one merchant whisper to another, "Thank God it ended the way it did. We needed that." Needed what, exactly? The death? The show? The illusion of control? That's the question, isn't it? Historians still debate whether trials like this offered real justice or just social sedation. Were they legal procedures, or were they rituals in disguise, meant to soothe the raw nerves of communities stretched thin by war, plague, and hunger? In Falaise, the answer seems obvious. This was less about crime and more about restoring balance. And that balance? It came through blood. Or the performance of blood. You stop at a stall where a woman is selling pig-shaped cakes, frosted pink and piped with little icing eyes. She offers you one. For memory, she says, smiling. The good kind. You buy it, though you don't know why. Across the square, someone is repainting the signage above the courthouse. Fresh ochre. Crisp lettering. A sign of maintenance, but also of preservation. It's as if the town wants to polish this moment into history before it fades. You glance toward the alley near the abbey, where a group of townsfolk are talking. One of them is the boy's uncle. You recognize him from the trial. He's not talking about grief. He's laughing. Sharing a story about someone falling into a pig pen. The details escape you, but the punchline lands. Everyone chuckles. Even him. And that's when it truly clicks. The trial wasn't just about the pig. It was about healing. In a world where most pain has no cause and most deaths no justice, people need a narrative. A scapegoat. A ritual. Something to say, this happened for a reason. And once that reason is found, once it's named and punished, then people can laugh again. Bake again. Repaint the courthouse. Falaise needed the pig to be guilty not because it made sense, but because senseless things can't be tolerated. Not when they happen to someone so small, so fragile, so innocent. The townspeople needed to do something, and in the absence of answers, they chose action. They chose fire. You walk past the old holding pen, now just an empty corner behind the tithing barn. The straw is gone. The gate is missing a hinge. A child has drawn a crude face on the wall in chalk. It has pointy ears and a frown. Beneath it, one word, evil. You run your hand along the rough wood and think about how easy it is to reshape history into something neat. How stories evolve from uncertainty to certainty, just by repetition. The pig wasn't an animal anymore. She was the villain. And villains give closure. You think about that mother, the one who sat in the back of the courtroom, hollow-eyed. You haven't seen her since the judgment. Not in the chapel. Not in the square. Maybe she's finally resting. Or maybe, just maybe, she still knows what everyone else has worked so hard to forget. That there was never really proof. That it could have been anything. A fall. A freak accident. Another animal entirely. But once the town decided, they couldn't afford to revisit. They couldn't allow uncertainty to rise again. So they buried it, deep, beneath verdicts and bonfires and cake. You sit on a bench beneath the shadow of the old well, cake in hand. You take a bite. It's sweet. Surprisingly so. Soft in the middle, with a dusting of honey and nutmeg. A strange kind of comfort food, made in honor of a life extinguished in confusion. And you realize, this is how the town copes. Through sugar. Through stories. Through sacred lies that feel more real than truth. The sun breaks through the clouds, briefly. And Falaise, at least for now, is at peace. You leave Falaise behind for a time, physically, at least. The town sinks into the distance behind your horse cart, swallowed by hills and morning mist. But the story doesn't leave you. Not really. It clings to your thoughts like ash in your clothes, stubborn and silent. And as you ride, bumping over root-tangled roads and through forests where wolves still prowl and superstition grows thicker than moss, you start to notice something strange. Falaise wasn't an anomaly. Not even close. In village after village, town after town, the tale repeats, different animals, different crimes, but the same absurd echo of legal ceremony applied to creatures who don't even know they've been summoned. You pass through a hamlet where, years ago, a cow was accused of witchcraft after trampling a man who'd slipped on his own wine jug. The cow was found guilty, branded, and exiled across the river. We couldn't take the risk, an old man explains with a shrug. It was acting, unnatural. In a quiet Swiss town nestled against snowy cliffs, the locals still whisper about a rooster put on trial in 1474. Its crime? Laying an egg. A biological impossibility that terrified the townsfolk into believing Satan had sent a creature of deception into their midst. The rooster was burned alive, of course, because nothing says logical resolution like flambéed poultry. Then there's the infamous rat trial in Autun, France. The rats had been raiding grain stores, so the town formally summoned them to court. Yes, summoned. An actual letter was read aloud, inviting the rats to appear and defend themselves. They didn't, obviously. Their lawyer, a real, paid lawyer, argued they'd failed to show up because the roads were too dangerous, what with all the cats. You'd laugh, if it weren't so disturbingly sincere. Historians still argue about these trials. Were they meant to be literal justice? Or something closer to ritual? Was it about accountability? Order? Or a medieval coping mechanism for a world always tilting between famine and plague? You suspect it was all of that, and maybe more. These weren't just weird side notes in dusty legal tomes. They were real events with real consequences. Pigs were hanged. Goats were flogged. Even insects, flies, beetles, locusts, were excommunicated, driven out of fields with holy water and court decrees. In 16th century Italy, a bishop ordered a trial against a swarm of weevils. They were ruining the crops and offending God. The insects didn't show. A second summons was issued. You can guess how that went. And still, the trials happened. You ride through a village in Burgundy and hear tales of a donkey who was accused of carnal relations with a man. The case was so high-profile that it reached church courts. In an unexpected twist, the donkey was acquitted. The judges ruled she had been the victim, and the villagers praised her gentle nature. You let that one sit for a while. It's as if these societies didn't just want justice, they wanted moral clarity. And if that meant dragging animals into court, dressing them in tiny tunics, or reading verdicts to herds of beetles, then so be it. You wonder, did these people believe the animals were culpable? Or did they simply find comfort in the illusion of control? If chaos had a face, even a snorting, bristly, pig-shaped one, it could be fought, punished, hung from a wooden beam. The more you travel, the more the pattern emerges. Animals that wander too close to human tragedy often end up punished not for what they did, but for what they represent. Loss, disruption, powerlessness. They're scapegoats. Literal ones. One old monk you meet at an abbey in Lorraine offers a soft, strange perspective. Over bread and bitter beer, he says, perhaps it wasn't about the pigs. Perhaps it was about us. About proving that we still believed in rules. Even when the world did not. You carry those words with you long after he's gone to sleep. You return to Falaise eventually, though no one expects you. The town hasn't changed much. Children still run through the square. The market still hums. But there's a new stone marker at the edge of town, small, unassuming, and carved with a pig's snout inside a crude circle. No plaque. No date. Just the symbol. You stand before it for a while, wondering if it's a memorial or a warning. Either way, the message is the same. This happened. Not just here. Everywhere. The day after your return to Falaise, the scribe invites you, somewhat unexpectedly, into the courthouse archives. It's a low room beneath the main chamber, lit by slanted beams of dusty light and smelling strongly of wax and mildew. The walls are lined with scrolls, books, and leather-bound ledgers stacked like uneven bricks. You didn't know the place even had an archive. Thought you'd be interested, he says, handing you a bundle of parchments wrapped in frayed twine. Old judgments. Some odd. You sit on a creaking stool and begin to read. There's one case involving a group of frogs who were disrupting the peace of prayer near a monastery. Verdict? Exiled by clerical decree. Another entry details the excommunication of moles after repeated tunneling under a vineyard blessed by the bishop himself. And then there's a chilling record from a village near Avignon. 3 pigs executed after a stampede that crushed a child, and their owner fined for failing to train them properly. What you're holding is proof that the pig of Falaise wasn't the exception. She was part of a long lineage of accused animals, each one folded into the evolving idea of justice. You ask the scribe, do you think they believed in this? Truly believed? He shrugs. Does it matter? They wrote it. That makes it real. Historians continue to wrestle with that very idea. Was this sincere legalism, or a symbolic theater of control? Some scholars, like Edward Payson Evans, writing centuries later, insisted that these trials reflected a deep belief in the moral capacity of animals. Others say it was pure projection. A community's need to assign meaning where nature offers only randomness. The scribes, the clerks, the judges, they weren't fools. They knew pigs didn't write confessions. They knew rats wouldn't come when summoned. But in the absence of certainty, they leaned into formality. Scrolls. Seals. Structure. If the world didn't make sense, at least the paperwork did. And this leads you to the strangest part of all. There are hints, buried in the margins of some of these documents, that not everyone bought into the process. You find one faded note next to a verdict from 1428 that reads, "This feels more for the people than for the truth." No name. No signature. Just a quiet dissent scribbled between inked lines of justice. You imagine that scribe now, inking out the sentence with one hand, doubting it with the other. Later that day, you visit the apothecary, who's rumored to have once studied law in Paris. He's eccentric, of course, his beard contains more herbs than hair, but his memory is sharp. Over a cup of something vaguely medicinal, he tells you that in some universities, law professors debated animal trials as intellectual exercises. They'd ask, he says, if a dog kills a man, is it murder or misfortune? If a bee stings a bishop, must it be absolved before death? He smiles, toothlessly. No one ever answered. But they all argued. Even today, scholars argue over the intent behind these trials. Were they proto-animal rights? A satire of legal excess? Or simply a way to punish people through their livestock, especially in feudal societies where peasants were their animals in the eyes of the law? One theory suggests these trials were moral scapegoating, that by punishing a creature incapable of guilt, towns could redirect their grief without starting a witch hunt, or worse, questioning divine will. Because if the pig is guilty, God is still just. But if she's innocent, then maybe no one is in charge at all. That night, you sit under the stars near the edge of the town cemetery. The wind rustles the grass, and the distant bell of the abbey marks the hour. You think of all the animals that once stood in makeshift courts, tried for crimes they couldn't understand in languages they couldn't speak. Goats whipped for public mischief. Roosters burned for laying eggs. Bulls fined for damaging carts. Dogs declared guilty of arson when they knocked over candles. The list goes on. And always, there was a human need beneath it. The need to name guilt. The need to punish something tangible. The need to stand above the storm and say, we still control the story. You glance back toward the town. Falaise sleeps. Its windows glow like stars nestled into stone. And somewhere deep in the courthouse, that sealed parchment still waits. Guilt pressed into wax. Order forged from fear. You lie back in the grass and exhale. Maybe the pig's real crime wasn't biting a child. Maybe it was showing them, just for a second, that chaos doesn't care about scrolls, or judges, or truth. And that was simply too terrifying to bear. The next morning, the light drips in through your window with a kind of quiet insistence, golden and warm, the kind that would usually promise a peaceful day. But something about it feels off. Or maybe you're just still thinking about that scroll in the archive. About the pig. About how justice, once stretched too far, starts to resemble something else entirely. You wander to the edge of town, past the fields where the children now chase butterflies instead of rumors. And as you walk, a curious thought creeps in, like a draft under a closed door. How far removed is all of this from now? Not now in Falaise, of course. Now in the real now. Your now. Modern courts, modern laws, modern minds. Surely we've moved beyond pigs and shackles. Surely we don't still try the innocent just to quiet a crowd. Right? You sit under a tree with peeling bark and think it through. Sure, we don't chain up pigs anymore, not literally. But scapegoats? Still very much in fashion. People, especially the powerless, are still punished to preserve the appearance of order. Institutions still favor story over nuance. And if the crowd demands it, justice often flexes to match their volume. Historians and legal scholars alike have pointed to modern echoes of these medieval animal trials. Consider corporate liability. A company, a non-human entity, is tried, fined, even condemned as if it had a mind of its own. Or look at how children are tried as adults in courtrooms when a jury wants someone to blame, someone to hang a story on. The language may have changed. The instinct has not. We still treat the unknowable with punishment, the unpredictable with containment. And when a tragedy occurs and no clear villain exists, one is usually made. Sometimes it's a person. Sometimes it's a policy. Sometimes it's just the easiest target. There's a term you once heard, legal fiction. It refers to something untrue being treated as true for the sake of convenience. And really, wasn't that pig in Falaise the ultimate legal fiction? A beast treated as a criminal, not because she was, but because she had to be, for the story to make sense, for the town to sleep at night. You walk back through Falaise, observing with new eyes. There's the innkeeper's son who broke a milk jug last year and was blamed for souring the entire batch. There's the widow accused of bad luck after her husband died and her roof caved in the same week. People need to point, to assign, to close the loop. And in those moments, the need for truth becomes secondary to the need for resolution. You think of modern headlines, of rushed trials, of public outcry dictating sentencing, of the way complex systems are often boiled down to a name, a face, a single person to shoulder the blame. It's not about pigs anymore, but it's still very much about ritual. The rituals are just subtler now. The robes are darker. The language, more clinical. But the need remains. As strong as ever. Some scholars suggest this pattern is built into the human psyche. We evolved to fear chaos, to see patterns even where none exist. And when randomness rears its head, whether in the form of a child's death, a market crash, or a viral scandal, we fall back on the same instinct. Make it someone's fault. Even if it's a pig. You stop by the chapel, where Father Edouard is dusting the altar. He doesn't notice you at first. You ask him if he's ever regretted the trial. He wipes a candlestick in silence, then replies without turning. I regret that the child died, he says. I regret that we needed a trial at all. He doesn't say whether he regrets the verdict. Later, you pass the town square. There's a puppet show for the children. One of the puppets is a pig in a tiny noose, and the kids squeal with delight when it's rescued by a wooden knight. The story's changed. Just a little. It's become a fable now. You stay to watch the end. The pig is redeemed. The knight turns to the audience and says, justice means knowing why something happened, not just punishing what happened. The kids cheer. You smile, a little, but the wind is cold. Because in real life, there are no wooden knights. No puppets. No curtain call. Just people, caught in a storm, desperate for certainty. And pigs, who never asked to be part of the play. The days stretch out gently now, like lazy sheep sunning themselves on the hills beyond Falaise. There's a calm that settles after any great upheaval, a quiet so complete it almost hums. But underneath the quiet, a question lingers. What does it mean to be guilty, if you never meant to harm anyone? You sit by the brook just beyond the abbey wall, listening to the water play over smooth stones. A group of children splash nearby, and you watch them with a certain softness. None of them look over their shoulders. None of them seem afraid. The town has its peace again, bought and paid for with the life of a pig. But that question keeps turning over in your mind like a smooth coin. If the pig wasn't guilty in the way we understand guilt, conscious, deliberate, premeditated, does that make her innocent? It's not as simple as yes or no. Because the more you examine it, the more you see that medieval justice didn't operate on binaries. It operated on symbols. On responsibility, not intention. The pig represented a disruption. A horror. A ripple in the pattern. And for that, she had to go. And that brings you to an uncomfortable realization. If guilt is about disruption, about causing pain or breaking order, even by accident, then almost anything can be framed as guilty. A storm. A child. A pig. Or you. This idea isn't just historical trivia. It's a thread that weaves through centuries of moral philosophy. Thomas Aquinas wrestled with it. Sin, he wrote, requires knowledge and will. But what about when you cause harm without either? What if harm simply happens, and people still need to clean it up, make sense of it, assign blame? In medieval courts, animals were judged because they fit into the pattern of what could be punished. They were physical, present, touchable. Unlike fate, unlike disease, unlike death. You can't hang a fever. You can't excommunicate grief. But you can tie a noose around a sow. And so they did. You think about this while watching the children laugh. The littlest one is pretending to be a knight. He holds up a stick like a sword and shouts something about saving the town. The others cheer. Then one child points toward a blackbird fluttering on a fence post. That bird's a spy, he yells. It saw the pig trial. And just like that, the game shifts. The bird becomes the enemy. The knight becomes the judge. Someone makes a noose from a vine. You watch this unfold with the growing realization that the story of the pig hasn't ended. It's just changed shape, morphed into a game. A story passed down not as tragedy, but as lesson. The pig becomes shorthand for consequences. Break the rules, face the rope. Historians often write about the didactic nature of medieval justice. That it wasn't just about punishment, it was about teaching. About showing the public what not to do. Even if the condemned was incapable of understanding the lesson, the audience would understand. The community would remember. And here it is, still echoing. Later that evening, you sit in the tavern and listen to a traveler from Nantes spin a tale about a heretical sheep. Everyone laughs. They toast the cleverness of the judge, the absurdity of the animal, the justice of the outcome. Someone even suggests making a play about it. The idea of animal trials has become entertainment now. But as you nurse your drink, you realize that entertainment is how people digest discomfort. It's how they process fear without being paralyzed by it. Laughter turns the grotesque into something survivable. Even now, in your time, you've seen it. True crime shows. Courtroom dramas. Memes about notorious cases. The machinery of justice turned into content. And beneath it all, a deep, hungry need to make sense of pain. Because if there's a story, there's a lesson. And if there's a lesson, maybe it won't happen to you. That's what the pig gave Falaise, a parable. A moment of collective trauma rewrapped as clarity. You finish your drink and walk out into the cooling night. The stars are out. The wind smells like wood smoke and chamomile. Somewhere, someone is singing an old folk song. You pause in the square, right where the scaffold once stood. There's nothing there now. Just flattened earth and a few scuff marks from cartwheels. But if you listen closely, you can almost hear the echoes. Not of the pig. Of the people. Telling themselves the story again, and again, and again. Until they believe it. The days roll on, gentle and uneventful. The town returns to its routines like a child crawling back into a favorite blanket. You see it everywhere, the mending of nets by the river, the whistle of the baker kneading dough, the slow rebuilding of the garden fence behind the chapel. Falaise has settled back into itself. And yet, the story remains. It's etched into the air like invisible ink, visible only when you squint. You see it in the way people look at pigs now, hesitant, a beat too long. The way children lower their voices when mentioning the trial. The way even the scribe, now more comfortable with a joke, still locks the archive after every visit. One day, out of curiosity or restlessness or something in between, you visit the spot again. The place where she died. The scaffold's gone, the ashes swept, but something stubborn clings to the earth. Not in smell or sight. In memory. There's a single wildflower pushing up through the dirt. Yellow. Quiet. It doesn't mean anything, but you can't help feeling like it does. You sit near it and wonder, what is the legacy of a trial like this? Falaise is just one on the map of medieval Europe, one court among thousands. And yet, this trial, this pig, somehow became legendary. Her name, unrecorded. Her death, unforgettable. She became a symbol, not by choice, not by action, but by necessity. Because Falaise needed a story to explain the unexplainable. And stories, when repeated enough, become truth. The ripple didn't stop here. Word of the trial spread. Scribes copied it. Monks debated it. Lawyers in other towns cited it. As in the case of the Falaise cell, one 15th century document begins, referencing the trial as precedent. Imagine that, a pig, unknowingly becoming part of case law. In that way, she won. Not justice, but immortality. You begin to realize that Falaise isn't haunted by the pig's ghost. It's haunted by the story they told about her. And like all ghost stories, it lingers because it filled a silence that terrified them. Silence about why children die. Why nature sometimes turns cruel. Why the world refuses to stay in its neat little lines. So they filled the silence with structure. With ritual. With rope. And now that structure has calcified into legend. Even now, in the tavern, the tale is told with a twist. One man says the pig growled like a demon. Another insists she stood on her hind legs, walking like a man. A third, with wine-glazed confidence, claims she spoke before the news tightened. I am but what man has made me. No one questions the logic. The more impossible the tale becomes, the more comfort it offers. And here's the strange thing, you don't even blame them. Because stories help people survive. And the stranger the world becomes, the more people crave a frame around the chaos. Historians still argue whether the people of Falaise knew what they were doing. Did they truly believe the pig was guilty? Or did they go through the motions because that's what the world expected? One prevailing theory suggests it wasn't about belief, it was about performance. You act as if justice is real, so it becomes real. You dress the pig. You read the charges. You recite the prayers. Not because they work, but because without them, you have nothing. And nothing is far more frightening than a snorting scapegoat. You walk through the town with this thought rattling in your chest. Past the church. Past the stable. Past the corner where the blacksmith once measured the rope. You stop at the bakery, now selling justice loaves, small pig-shaped buns with cloves for eyes. You eat one. It's good. Sweet. Spiced. Memorable. The baker nods at you like you've participated in something sacred. And in a way, you have. The trial wasn't just a moment in time. It was a ritual. And rituals demand witnesses. As you walk back home, the sunset turns the rooftops gold. The light touches everything, the stone walls, the chapel cross, the simple homes. Even the empty square, where shadows now dance without meaning. And you wonder if, years from now, when children ask their grandparents about the pig, they'll hear a tale about justice, or about fear. Maybe both. Because that's the legacy of Falaise. Not a pig. Not a rope. But a town that told a story so loud, so vivid, and so strange, It forgot it was ever just a story. The last of summer fades from fillets like a long exhale. Leaves rustle brown and brittle in the breeze, whispering things no one wants to hear aloud. That time moves forward, that stories settle, that memory grows moss. The pig has been dead for weeks now, maybe months. You stopped counting. So has everyone else. The square is alive again, but with new rhythms. The market smells of apples and smoked fish. A traveling minstrel plays near the fountain. People gather, talk, laugh. And yet, that one story lingers, never spoken directly, but always present, like a shadow that doesn't quite line up with the light. You walk through the town with the quiet steps of someone who's watched too much and spoken too little. A few nods greet you, recognition, perhaps, or shared weariness. Most people don't ask about the trial anymore. Those who do only want the version that ends cleanly. The version where a pig committed a crime and paid the price. The version with a clear villain. You stop outside the courthouse one more time. The stone facade looks the same, but now you see something new, faint carvings, nearly worn away. Scratches in the shape of a spiral, or maybe a rope. Not official. Not deliberate. Something someone once etched when no one was watching. It feels like a confession, but not a loud one. You find yourself thinking about that moment in the trial when the pig looked around the courtroom, head tilted, and everyone took it as proof of guilt. As if confusion were a crime. As if not understanding your place in the world meant you deserved to be punished by it. And now, you can't help but wonder, how often has that same logic been applied to people? Outcasts, foreigners, the poor, the strange. Not because they did something, because they didn't fit. Fillets won't remember that part. Not officially. The scrolls will talk about justice. The church will talk about sin. The villagers will talk about closure. But the truth? The truth is quieter. The truth sits in the memory of those who watched the rope swing and felt no peace. The ones who remember the pig not as a monster, but as a mirror. Because she didn't snarl. She didn't attack. She just existed, in the wrong place, at the wrong time, in the wrong shape. And for that, she became the answer to a question no one had the courage to face. You spend one last night in fillets. By the window. By the square. The wind is soft, and the moonlight turns the cobblestones to silver. You see a lone pig wandering near the edge of town, someone's livestock, probably escaped again. No one runs out to chase it. No one sounds an alarm. They watch. Then they turn away. And maybe that's growth. Or maybe it's just fatigue. But either way, no ropes are brought out. The pig disappears into the mist. And you close your eyes, finally ready to sleep. Now, take a slow breath in, and let it go. The story of the fillets pig is over now. The square is quiet. The torches are cold. The scaffold has returned to memory, and the courthouse sleeps beneath its stone dome, its scrolls tucked away like dreams between pages. There's no more shouting. No more judgment. Just the soft hum of a town that did what it thought it had to, and then moved on. Maybe it's easier to sleep when you believe in tidy endings. When you think every act has a cause. Every pain has a villain. Every fear can be chained, tried, and hanged. But real life isn't like that. Real life is messier. It's quieter. And sometimes the things we do in our search for order leave echoes longer than the chaos ever could. So, if your thoughts are still tumbling, if your heart still feels the weight of a courtroom where a pig was asked to explain herself, let that go now. Let the world grow soft around the edges. Let the cobblestones fade. Let the rope loosen. And picture only stillness. A quiet field. A low sun. A pig in the distance. No trial, no crowd, just a gentle snort and the rustle of grass as she wanders freely, without judgment, into the golden hush of evening. There. It's over. The world is calm. And you? You're safe here. Sleep well, wherever you are. You made it. Sweet dreams.